where we will talk about future projects, offspring projects that emerged during our research within the BMagic project. Well, they didn't really emerge. We invested a lot of energy and time, you know how it goes, in writing applications. And we would now like to show to you briefly some of these projects, and they are very fresh. They just started. And I think I'm going to go first, since I'm here, and introduce to you a project based at the University of Antwerp. Can I close this? Yeah, okay. Based at the University of Antwerp, funded also by the University of Antwerp. It has its roots in the academic discipline of digital humanities. It uses data-driven technology to present what we think is a novel viewpoint on ideological bias in the past. So we all know that previous historical research has demonstrated that people in the past displayed fair amounts of explicit ideological bias towards certain racial, gender, class, and age groups, especially gender history, of course, and post-colonial studies have revealed explicit sexist and racist beliefs and stereotypes, and social history exposed explicit standpoints towards class and age. However, recent advances in cognitive studies have indicated that ideological bias is not just about explicit beliefs. For instance, we might think that we have no racial prejudices, but nonetheless only hire people from certain racial groups. Just to say that implicit bias manifests itself not just in deliberate actions, like what we answer in a questionnaire, but also in how long we look into the eyes of the people who give us the questionnaire implicitly. So moving from cognitive studies to history, the aim of this project is to give a more robust understanding of how bias, both explicit and implicit, functioned in the past. Understanding not only what humans thought or people thought, but how biased thinking structured interactions between people in the past. People pick up ideological bias from their parents, in school, through the mass media, and by internalizing societal norms. And in this current project, we look for a proxy of interlinked social learning, so intersectional, to elicit implicit patterns and trends relating to ideological bias. We more specifically, you can see that here, put forth 3 case studies in crucial areas of social control: education, and there we have a corpus of children's literature; mass communication, based on the Magic Lantern slides and performances; and regulation, based on police reports, and that will be a work package directed by Ilja van Damme, who is also principal investigator in the project. So through the application of artificial intelligence routines and algorithms, machine learning algorithms, difficult word, algorithms, we will scrutinize the wealth of digitized material that comes with these interlinked areas of study. And one of our privileged partners, I'm happy to say, in this context is the Luzerna Magic Lantern web resource, Richard Krangle in the room. We will also integrate the slides that were digitized by the BMagic team. I'm looking at Sabine now. 11,000 slides? More or less, okay. And we will also integrate these slides in the Luzerna.
We have 20,000 slides on the share.
Yeah, okay. 20,000 slides on the share. And we will integrate a large amount of these slides that we unearthed, integrate them in the Luzerna database. So this way, we hope to mine and analyze large historical data records to give us detailed information about how these biases worked in the past. We were able to hire 3 PhD candidates and a postdoc researcher, and I will now give the floor to Eleonora Paklons, who is a PhD student dealing with the lantern. She just started. And then I will give the floor to our postdoc researcher, Thomas Smits, who will explain how the artificial intelligence, we call it the black machine, works. So the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, so I'm Eleonora Paklons, the PhD student working on the Magic Lantern part of the Goa project. And we know that people today hold all kinds of mostly implicit biases, but where did these biases come from and when did they become ingrained? Maybe we can start by looking at the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period in which bias was at its most explicit and socially acceptable. The lantern, moreover, is the perfect object of study as it reached mass audiences and was thus a crucial tool for social learning. Crucial to the construction of biases are the backgrounds or the contexts in which it functions. Therefore, in this early stage of my PhD, I'm specifically interested in the places or worlds projected by the lantern, both real and imaginary. As many of you may know, lantern travel slides or travelogues were one of the most popular lantern genres. And therefore, this project will study the developments in the content and context of Belgian travelogues between 1880, when photographic slides first became mass-produced and the travelogue became ubiquitous, and the Wall Street crash of 1929, when the lantern's heyday gradually came to an end. As Sabine told yesterday, Belgium did not have its own national slide production, so the slides were mostly imported and transnationally produced. And the slides often depicted faraway lands, but were at the same time firmly located in local performance contexts. Therefore, this project approaches the lantern from the perspective of theater and performance studies. So we're not only interested in the visual pictorial language of the slides themselves, but also in the shared experience of viewing them. The pitch black packed room, the bright screen, and the shared audiovisual experience all immersed audiences in virtual foreign worlds. But at the same time, the audiences were also firmly located in a room with a narrator, an audience, music, etc. And because photography was at this time widely considered to objectively document reality, the audiences often experienced the images they viewed as reality itself. And because audiences saw the same kinds of slides over and over again, the lantern soon produced mental slides as well. Virtual travel through the Magic Lantern thus became a veritable travel experience of its own and also ingrained all kinds of biases in the process. And of course it's difficult, maybe we can move to the next slide. Yeah. And of course it's difficult to trace patterns of bias from one specific slide alone, and therefore we need large quantities of data. This project looks at 63,000 slides, partly from the Lucerna Magic Lantern web resource and partly from slides digitized by recent projects such as the BMagic project. And here on my slide you can see two examples of places in my corpus. So the slide on the right belongs to the Charles Bulls collection we've already talked about in the past couple of days. And this is housed by the Municipal Archives of Brussels. And Charles Bulls was the mayor of Brussels in the last decade of the 19th century, and he was renowned for his many travels and the lectures he gave about them after his retirement. And this specific slide belonged to his lecture on the Messina earthquake of 1908. He composed this set himself. And among slides of ruined buildings and refugees, we find these reenactment slides showing archetypical figures from antiquity. And on this slide, we see a Roman at the amphitheater. And then the slide on the left is a slide from the Lucerna database. And this depicts a universalized sunset on an Orient Sea. And at first glance, we could say that the image on the right represents an imagined world, and the image on the left, a real world or a real place. But of course, we immediately noticed the oversaturated colors on the sunset slide, and also the fact that the Romans in the right image are of course contemporary actors reenacting the past and bringing it back to life. So with my project, I also want to challenge the artificial line that has often been drawn in literature between real places and imaginary places. And I want to look at both in order to fully investigate the space-making lantern. And before I let my co-supervisor take over, I already wanted to thank you for your attention, and I would be very grateful for any input or feedback from this very expert audience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Thomas Smits. I'm the postdoc in the project. I'm a historian of the 19th century illustrated press, actually, but I've moved on to the Magic Lantern now. In the last few years, I've been applying digital humanities, or actually large computer vision algorithms, to historical collections of images. And I would like to ask the people on slide. Yeah, so here you can see, with thanks to Richard Krengle of Lucerna, here you can see a random sample of 10,000 slides from Lucerna. And now you can see them just based on their imaged file. Right, so they're just based on the slide sets. But what we can do is actually use this tool from the Yale Digital Humanities Lab to order them based on visual similarity. So here you can see them changing. Now they are. So we use an algorithm which is actually developed to help self-driving cars to find clusters of visual similarity in this set. So for example, if you go here, you can see one of these clusters. I'm trying to zoom in a little bit. So this is mainly based on the sort of this part of the slide, right, which is around it. So this is maybe not the best example. I'm trying to find something more on the basis of, here you have a nice one. So these are all a lot of the locomotives in this sample, right? So you can see that all the locomotives have been clustered together here. So this is just one example. More recently, I've been experimenting with this large model called CLIP, which was introduced last year. It's a multimodal model, which actually is trained on image-text combinations. And if you apply it to a large data set such as Lucerna, you can ask it, you can give it textual queries, and then what it returns is actual images. So CLIP has learned visual concepts from language. So for example, we can ask the model here to show us couples in love. And I hope this works. It's always a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, here you go. So these are couples in love from Lucerna, and I hope that you will give some more, right? You can see them. But CLIP has learned all sorts of visual concepts. So I will just give another example. Have to slide back to my query part. So concerning Eleonora's project, we can also ask it to give us an image of London. Right. Again, maybe take some time. Here we go. Right, so here you can see that CLIP has actually learned from studying a large amount of image-text combinations on the internet to recognize images of London. And basically what we want to do in our project is use these algorithms to find large-scale patterns of biased representation in our around 60,000 slides. So if you have any queries for Lucerna, please come find me after this presentation. And thank you very much.
So the next project we would like to introduce is SciFair, Science at the Fair, an ERC project introduced by Nele Wijnands and Eva, right?
Okay, Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm extremely happy and proud to be able to present to you, to this audience, the SciFair, the Science at the Fair project. SciFair is as an acronym. I think I need to use this, yeah. Okay, here you see the full title, yeah. Science at the Fair, Performing Knowledge and Technology in Northwestern Europe between 1850 and 1914. So as Kurt already mentioned, it's an ERC project, so it's funded by the European Commission. And as I already mentioned a few days ago, it is actually a result of the research or the preliminary research I did in the framework of BMagic. So you can consider it as a result of BMagic too. We started, at least Eva and I started last October. So it's what we're going to talk about is really kind of intention, explaining what we are aiming to do. And particularly the PhD students only started last February, so that's only a few months. And Tim even 2 weeks ago. So SciFair is a project on, or what we want to study is the role that traveling show people played in the transmission and popularization of science, knowledge and technology at the fairgrounds of Western Europe or Northwestern Europe. As I said, between 1850 and 1914, we may expand this a little based on the sources. Particularly at a time when modern means of communication were not yet available and only a minority of the people could read, large groups of people were actually dependent on traveling shows and exhibitions for information. So in so-called anatomical cabinets, zoological and anthropological museums, as well as in so-called scientific theaters, fairground performers showed what they called the wonders of nature and spectacular scientific developments, but also more broad new things. I mean, when we use science, and that's something we discussed yesterday, it's a bit of a problematic term maybe, because it is not only about science, it's more maybe about new knowledge circulation of visual knowledge. That's our subject of the conference today, and as I think Eleonora already also demonstrated how also ideas of images of faraway countries, something like that, were circulated and introduced at these kind of fairgrounds to people who were not able to travel, for instance. So the hypotheses of this, well, we start from the following hypothesis, that the fair in this period was not merely a folk tradition or a local tradition, as it is often considered in existing literature, but it was a hub for international exchange in which these itinerant show people played a pivotal and modernizing role, or a modernizing role in the circulation and popularization of science and knowledge amongst people across the social spectrum. So because they were actually relying, I think we all have also learned during this conference, they relied on very efficient networks, so they traveled in large geographical areas. At the same time, we also assume that show people, through their performance, not only were using or demonstrating explicit, or they used explicit discourses on science or technology, they were also challenging, reinforcing implicit knowledge or social values concerning health, concerning gender, concerning nation, class, or race. So we have different levels of knowledge circulation, so to say, that we will have to take into account. I will very briefly go through the objectives as they were articulated in the project proposal. So it's, as I said, a bit of an intention. Okay, so the project will provide the first comprehensive and historical study of the fairground as a stage for science popularization beyond national boundaries, so spanning several decades and generations, which allows for both the synchronic as well as the diachronic analysis. And the geographical scope we are taking is actually Belgium as a very important central hub, for these show people and its neighboring countries, France, the Netherlands, Germany, and Luxembourg. And depending on the case studies we're going to work, it might also expand a bit on to Spain and Italy and Switzerland. But that is the main geographical scope. Instead of merely comparing these national traditions, we would like to study actually patterns of transnational exchange, but focusing on local differences between provincial towns. And this way we aim to nuance and adjust existing national perspectives on popular science or science circulation. Or science communication, we could call it like that as well, which are in existing studies predominantly based on Anglo-Saxon on the one hand and French sources on the other, often focusing on, of course, influential metropolises such as London and Paris. So we would like to switch this focus to more regional towns. As such, we aim to identify and analyze both explicit and implicit discourses, as I already mentioned, underpinning these scientific shows, challenge and look at the way how they challenged or either reinforce these kind of social values. And by combining these approaches, we aim to contribute to our understanding of processes of knowledge circulation in the broad sense of the word. So as I said, it's also about visual culture, through performance, and demonstrate how that relates to the popular understanding and perception of science and knowledge. And finally, the last important aspect I already referred to when I introduced Héloïse Gaillard. As we will also work or develop, and that's something Eva will discuss a little bit or talk about a little bit later on. We are developing a database that assembles and centralizes all the sources or collected the data we collect as a research team. So that can be linked in various ways, and that we would like to also open up later on for further research. So that, in that sense, we aim to also support this idea of the fairground culture as an intangible cultural heritage that needs to be preserved and recognized as such by UNESCO. Very briefly, before I give the floor to Eva, how to study the fairground or fairground history. It's similar to the magic lantern, let's say, because of course lantern culture is part of this fairground culture because it shares its ontological basis with theatre and performance, as it is transitionary by nature, and this momentary character of itinerant entertainment results, of course, in the fact that we have limited sources. So it urges us also to study it as a theatrical event, combining as a communicative encounter between the performers on the one hand and the spectator on the other. At the same time, fairground events were, of course, exemplary as a multimedial for the ways in which they combined modalities from the theatre, but also new media technologies, as for instance the magic lantern, of course, but also mechanical sceneries, puppetries and automats, and all kinds of other nice things to create effects. And again, as a part of intangible cultural heritage, we also have to deal with it as an oral tradition that is communicated through families, legacies. So that's also something we need to take into account. Which so methodologically speaking, we are combining methods from theatre and performance studies on the one hand, combined with perspectives from the history of science, media studies and digital histories, as you will learn later, to map these transnational networks and practices of knowledge circulation. I don't think I'll have really a lot of time to go on to this, but I will just... So, as said, one of the challenges is that that we take a transnational approach to what is often considered as a very local practice. I already said that sources are extremely fragmented because they left fewer remains, and so we have to work with, so they're scattered among different kinds of archives, such as, and it's similar again to Magic Lantern culture, city archives, museum collections, private collections, and family legacies. We also need to work, and again, there is an overlap with Lantern research with various types of sources. There's on the one hand, the discursive sources in the journals and the reviews that we work with in newspapers. But on the other hand, we also work with a lot of visual source material and material sources, such as you can see here, a wax figure from an itinerant museum. And we do know a lot of nice collections that still are available to work with. And finally, the object is not the event. Again, you know what we are talking about. We've been talking about it all for a couple of days now. What we study, the slide or the object or the sources we encounter are already are traces of a performance or traces of a certain event. They're not the events themselves. They are representations that were already interpreted or were already used, or that we need to reinterpret to kind of get an idea of what it must have been like to experience such an event. This is the team. You probably recognize the couple of people that have been here the last few days. They're there in the back. I just wanted to show the picture because they also prepared on a poster for this conference. And we actually temporarily replaced the film posters here around the corner with their research posters. They're happy to, so please go and talk to them during the lunch. They will be there to discuss their research projects, their particular focus that they will work on the next couple of years. And finally, I just give the word to Eva, who is going to say a few words on the digital aspect of our research.
Okay, maybe just a little bit lower. So, hi everyone. So, as Nela already mentioned, we have some challenges to deal with. So the question is then, how do we know or trace when and where fairs took place, which attractions were present, but also who were the owners of these attractions, and so on. And then another aspect that Nela already mentioned is, of course, how do we make these disparate sources available, not only for researchers, but also to the general public. Our answer to that is, in a way, making use of a database. So we make use of NodeGoat, which is an online relational database, which links various types of information and data together. Because a simple Excel sheet would just not be enough. There are too many fine-grained items that we're looking for to do that. So NodeGoat is shaped by the researcher's needs, so it's completely customizable, which is of course very handy for our project. And very essential is also that it takes geographical and temporal aspects into account, which is of course for historical research very essential. So mainly we have two functions where we use the database for. So on the one hand, each of us has its personal projects that can be put into the database. And of course, there's also a lot of collaboration because everything we find is put into the database, and everyone in the project can delete things, can add items, can change items. Another aspect is then, of course, that we want to disseminate and preserve the sources and the material we gather. So hopefully at the end of the project, it's our intention to kind of build a website in front of the database that we're building, and so that people can download certain things, but also can play around with the information that we have gathered. So the image that you see here, it's not 100% clear, but it's basically the backbone of our database and how everything that we're looking at is connected to each other. A tiny bit more about how our database is then constructed. So it's constructed out of two categories, let's say. On the one hand, there are objects,
And in our case, that means we're tracing persons, so show people mostly, also the attractions, the events, and sources and media files that are linked to that. Another aspect in the database are what the makers of NodeGode call categories. And so these can be seen as, let's say, lists that you can keep on using through these various objects. So that means type of attractions, also type of events that we're locating, if someone was male or female, these kind of things. And the image you see is an example of a leaflet in our database for which we can then type in a lot of different information. So we can say things about the names of people and events. We can say when something started and ended, the owners, name changes, professions of people, and so on. So what is also very nice about NodeGode is that we can also do some visualizations, which is for research a very nice way to come up with new research questions, guide your research into maybe other directions. And so what you see here is a geographical visualization of the menagerie from Émile Pianet, who was traveling to Switzerland and certain parts of France. So this really gives us an idea of where these people went, and can give us more insights. Another kind of visualization that is interesting is that we can do network visualizations. And so what you see here is Émile Pianet, so the owner of that menagerie I just mentioned. And what you see here is basically all the organizations that he was connected to. So he's connected to not only the French Union for show people, but also the one in Switzerland and in Italy, and was even connected to the Société Histoire Naturelle de Toulouse. So this is really also, again, a way to start research and explore what this particular person then was doing and guide your research in a particular way. Then to end, so far we have about 1,700 persons, or mostly show people in our database. Most of them are men. We have more than 1,400 attractions in there, which are museums, theaters, carousels, menageries, and so on. At the moment, we also have about 300 events, so mainly fairs that took place across France, and we're obviously going to expand that to what was happening in Belgium, Germany, and other countries. We also have gathered a lot of sources, so over more than 400 sources, which include newspapers, journals, and also just your typical archive boxes. And then over more than 2,200 media items, which include postcards, photos, leaflets, and so on. And so all this data, and so over years this will amass more, and we hope that we will have, at the end of the project, a very nice database that everyone can make use of. Thank you.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Evelien Jonckheere, who started a postdoc project. Evelien has been extremely active within the BMagic project and now started a new research line at the Research Center for Visual Poetics, University of Antwerp.
And Kurt is also my promoter, so I wanted to stress this. And he helped me also along the way. So, and as you will hear, there are also some overlappings with the Cypher project, to which I will be connected as well, from a sideline, of course. So, actually, the idea for the new project comes from the lantern slides. The ideas were there. So during the BMagic research, lantern slides showing only faces regularly crossed my path. See, for example, also the poster of this conference. Here you can see another example from standard toy lantern slides, and the unusual noses on certain characters, they struck me. Some very long, short, thick, and the nose seemed to be like a key in determining characters and stereotyped images. And at the same time, these types or typical faces reminded me of fin-de-siècle artwork by popular artists, caricaturists, such as Amédée Leiden or this one, Jules de Breuker. And fin-de-siècle fascination for so-called types was also clearly present in the popularity of variety shows, with so-called cross-dressers or transformists, such as the world-famous Leopoldo Fregoli. The Italian artist changed his identity at lightning speed by means of costumes, wigs, and accessories. And stereotypical imagery is ages old, but there are hints that there is a certain eruption in fin-de-siècle visual culture. So where does this fin-de-siècle fascination for these types, through stereotypical faces and silhouettes, come from? A first study directs me towards medical and criminal fin-de-siècle photography. Inspired by the advantages of photography to study faces in detail, anthropologists and criminologists, such as the notorious Cesare Lombroso, revived the older science of physiognomy that claimed to be able to detect a person's character based on their physical appearance. So studies of prisoners and patients resulted in typologies connected to physical appearance with levels of criminality or degeneration of persons. And Belgian archival sources illustrate these practices with sometimes disturbing images like one you see here as well, from the Musée Dr. Ghislain collection. Physiognomic fin-de-siècle theories even reached the popular fin-de-siècle stages. And the 1893 revue Bruxelles Électrique performed following scene on stage of the Brussels Alcazar Theatre. And I describe it a little bit. You see 8 female doctors with white aristocratic wigs and a magician's cape. They observe a white male in the center of the stage. And the doctors in the dark dress, one of them points to the man and deduces he must be a criminal, even though he's wearing a uniform. Why? Well, his belly has the same dimensions as that of the notorious murderer Pranzini. And the doctor standing on the far right, I don't know, is that the right? It doesn't matter. She takes a picture of the poor man with her portable photo camera, and she notes that this observation needs to be reported to the Congress of Criminal Anthropology. So this scene actually referred to an international criminology conference that really took place earlier that year in Brussels. And newspapers, they discussed the activities of the conference. So all these observations, they resulted in, for me, in following questions. To what extent did largely pseudoscientific physiognomic insights infiltrate the popular visual performances? And were scientific physiognomic typologies disseminated through popular performances, or was there rather a deconstruction of these typologies in the performances? So these are central questions that I would like to answer with this research project. And therefore, I'm first tracing so-called stereotypical images in different performances. More exactly, three performance hotspots in Brussels, in which I think that stereotypes seem to be key. The first one is popular theatre Alcazar, where annual revues or Christmas pantomimes were performed. And the second one is the popular waxwork museum, Musée du Nord, which changed also names to Musée Caston, where next to waxwork portraits of popular figures, the museum also organized ethnographic exhibitions that regularly attracted also anthropological researchers from Brussels. And then the third one is the Shadow Theatre Diable Corps, a Brussels counterpart and closely connected to the Parisian Chat Noir. And their shows and artwork, they depict silhouettes of symbolist ideal types. And consequently, I would like to examine the Brussels actors also, who constructed and disseminated the stereotypes at these places. Who were they? Where did they get inspiration from? Did they have connections with lawyers, with scientists who were disseminating physiognomic theories? So it is known also that, for example, at these end of the year shows, some influential guests came there, like the art patron Edmond Picard, even the king. And both the Musée du Nord and the artistic cabaret Le Diable au Corps seemed to be embedded in a dense Brussels network of artists, journalists, writers, performers with connections to science and politics. So I hope to detect these physiognomic classifications, such as health, class, gender, age, race, nation in Brussels performance, as well as their deconstructions by examining the visual and narrative discourses of the performances. And this through directors' books, anthropological accounts of exotic exhibitions, newspaper articles, and so on. So in the end of the year spectacles, you see also, for example, fire brigades and the police frequently portrayed as seductive women. And also a famous stereotype was the naughty working class boy, the Brussels Catje, staged as a hero of the show and still today a popular stereotype. So, to conclude, this research aims to link speculative fin-de-siècle physiognomic classifications and the corresponding socio-political discourses to stereotypes and its deconstructions in fin-de-siècle Brussels. So as such, I hope to train a certain physiognomic visual literacy that maybe may have worked as a kind of image recognition technology avant la lettre. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelien. To initiate a project is always an exciting thing to do. And this is also the case with Natalija Majsova, she's there. Although, a bit sadly, I have to add that this also involves Natalija moving to Slovenia. But lines are short, and of course, we will collaborate. But I'll let you explain your project first.
Thank you, Kurt. Well, I'd like to spend the next few minutes reflecting on the inter and perhaps transdisciplinary and cross-regional impact of B-Magic. So in 2018 to 2020, I was actually a postdoc at the Catholic University in Louvain-la-Neuve as a part of the B-Magic project. And I spent that time mostly working with the great archival and heritage institution, the Mundaneum in Mons. So those were the first 2 years of the B-Magic project. So I guess all of us were really focused on visiting archives, identifying materials, and also finding analytical angles. And as a cultural studies scholar, I was actually very interested in the aspect of heritage interpretation and conservation. And in this sense, the Mundaneum, which was a visionary utopian institution in the early 20th century, then kind of got forgotten and then got reinterpreted through different narratives. In this sense, I found it especially intriguing. And of course, it's the largest Wallonian collection of lantern slides, housing around 30,000 slides as far as yeah, at least this is what my data was in 2020. And one of my major outputs within the B-Magic project, apart from the volume which we co-edited with Sabine and talked about a couple of days ago, was actually an article where I examined, using the Mundaneum as a case study, I examined how lantern heritage interpretation narratives are conditioned by certain institutional characteristics, from its missions to its history. And in doing so, I actually had to work intensely with the nexus of collective memory processes and heritage identification, preservation, and interpretation principles. Now, fast forward a couple of months, I ended up leaving the B-Magic position during the pandemic in 2020, hoping to take on a more permanent position at the University of Ljubljana as an assistant professor at the Department of Cultural Studies and a research associate at the Center for Cultural Studies and Studies of Religion. Having arrived in Ljubljana, I was hoping that a grant application that would fund a project directly complementing the B-Magic one, focusing on early visual mass media and the role in collective identity formation on Slovenian territory in the late 19th and early 20th century, would get approved. Now, unfortunately, this is not what happened. The project was really, really appreciated by the reviewers, but it was considered of insufficient interest to receive funding by the funding body, the Slovenian Research Agency, and I should stress that this agency will tend to fund one national project per discipline in the humanities per year, so the competition is really, really heavy. Now, that year, the agency preferred to focus on a different aspect of poorly documented and under-researched cultural heritage. And this was, by coincidence, this project was also written by my team, and we focused on Slovenian folk pop music, which is a very, very popular genre consisting of polkas and waltzes, accordion bands dressed in stylized quasi-national apparel and singing to very vulgar lyrics normally. So my current position involves a fair amount of teaching and coordination, and of course, coordination of this fairly extensive project, which investigates the peculiar popularity of, as I said, polkas and waltzes in Slovenian popular music since the 1960s or late 1950s. Therefore, well, I mean, this is actually the second project on popular music that I've been involved with since 2013. But to me, it is very special in the sense that I feel that it's clearly haunted by some of the insights and methodological considerations that I became aware of during my work for the BMagic Consortium. So apart from the usual, so focusing on folk pop music in terms of its producers, text, distribution, and reception, which is kind of the basic matrix for cultural studies scholars, we've also integrated a media archaeology actually focused work package. And currently the work in this work package is mostly concerned with the accordion as this big piece of technology, a sonic machine, both in terms of its cultural history and impact, and in terms of its media affordances. To me, this project is also quite special in its attention to the different dispositives involved in folk pop music performance. In this sense, I feel it benefits a lot from two other smaller grants that I managed to secure to investigate dispositives of collective and cultural memory and remembrance. This is to justify the title of this presentation, so I'm talking about a series of smaller and larger grants that had been acquired also in relation to my BMagic experience. Now, to come back to folk pop, to Slovenian folk pop music, I have to stress that we're dealing with a very, very vibrant phenomenon that everybody in Slovenia seems to have an opinion about. So one of the great challenges of this project, partly in contrast to enterprises like BMagic, is that it involves dealing with the public in terms of both science communication and access. So access to the different scenes involved and to the underlying structures and to the real stakeholders who are quite some characters actually. Actually, we recently accidentally ended up getting involved in political campaigns in Slovenia, and our project sadly got smeared even by the Prime Minister of Slovenia, which is of course something that I can expand over break. Anyway, for me personally, this project, like BMagic and my previous research on Soviet science fiction cinema, for example, this project is also an important contribution to a larger question that I've been trying to tackle from various perspectives for just about over a decade now. And this question is about how technological transformations are actually remembered and forgotten. What is this dynamic and to what effect? To conclude, I'm currently actually very heavily invested in, and this is where we're talking about really future projects, I'm invested in modern technostalgia, which tends to revolve around technologies fantasized to be utopian in the 1980s and 1990s, and were mostly rendered obsolete by the advent of modern user experience in the 2010s. Now, this is, of course, a story to be continued. So, in the very pure sense of the word, a future project, and I think it's not an exaggeration to say that this future project, in any iteration that it might take eventually, is very much indebted to the time I'd spent in Louvain-la-Neuve and previously in Antwerp. Thank you.
Yeah, we need music now, of course, but unfortunately we didn't schedule that. But anyhow, no. On a serious note, it's a bit of an emotional moment for me because we have arrived at the end of the conference. Yes, we have. So when things start going wrong, this is ridiculous. So, okay, we've reached the end of the conference. What can I say? I would like to thank each and every one of you for bringing your enthusiasm, commitment, and your expertise to this 3-day conference. It has been very intense. It has been very inspiring. And I think also that it has been very enjoyable to be together during these 3 days. It's the final conference, but it's not the end of the project, of the BIMagic project. Ceci n'est pas un adieu, mais un au revoir. We learned yesterday that there's always an afterlife. Maison de la Bonne Presse taught us that. But I would like to ground the afterlife of the BIMagic project in the material world. So we have 4 or 5 books coming up within the Media Performance Histories series. So keep an eye open for that. And I would like to stress, I forgot to do that yesterday, that the series is of course open for proposals. Not only on the lantern, I see several people nodding, which is a good sign. Not only on the lantern, also on the lantern of course, but on visual culture in general, in the way in which I defined it yesterday. So please contact me or another series editor, Frank, Sabine or Nele, if you have an idea or a proposal that you want to discuss. Voilà, we can leave the venue, but please do so slowly, because in the hall you have the poster sessions and the people standing there who presented the future projects, so you can have a talk with them, enter into dialogue with them. And also we have a media archaeological market organized by Nele Wijnands, and also a book fair. I think I can call it a book fair, small book fair, and we'll be seeing you. Let's stay in touch. Oh, and yes, this evening, it's not part of the program, but I really do recommend to attend a performance, if you find time, in Ghent at Vooruit by Diederik Peters. The performance is called Apparitions, and it's based on the Pepper's Ghost. It plays with the Pepper's Ghost. It's marvelous. I'm into theater and performance studies. I see a lot of performances, but this one really, you have to see it. If you want to see it and you have questions about reaching Ghent or how to organize a ticket, talk to me. And in the best case, we can organize a posse and maybe people can travel together to see this performance, Apparitions by Diederik Peters. Thank you very much.